nice to be able to hear that. We're looking at a study of questions Jesus asked various people, and we got about halfway through the questions in Matthew chapter 9 last week. And so we're going to pick up at Matthew 9, verse 15. The last one we looked at was chapter 9, verse 5. Where Jesus asked the question, is it easier to say your sins are forgiven or to say arise and walk? Of course, neither is easier per se for the Son of God. He could do either one with equal ease because he has authority on earth to forgive sins. He has the power to heal as well. Now, when you drop down to 9:15, that's where we come to the next question that is asked. And that question is, can the children of the bride chamber mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? And of course, he goes on to say, but the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken from them, and then shall they fast. Wrong chapter here. I was just going to look for comparison here. I like to pull up a couple of parallel versions. ESV has, can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then will they fast? Now, as we've done each time, we want to look at the context to whom Jesus is speaking. Of course, we'll talk about lessons for them, lessons for us. But this is one where you really need the context, because that question without the context doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us. But the context is right there, verse 14. Then came to him the disciples of John, saying, why do we and the Pharisees fast oft, but thy disciples, Jesus' disciples, fast not? And so it's in that context that he answers them. This is to whom he's speaking in that immediate context, the disciples of John, but of course, speaking in general as well. Can the children of the bride chamber mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? And so he says the days are coming when the bridegroom will be taken away, and then shall they fast. So John's disciples want to know, why do we fast often? Why do the disciples of the Pharisees fast often, but yours do not? Well, that's the context here. Jesus, of course, is the bridegroom. You see, if you want to turn over to John, hold your spot there in Matthew. There's a passage in John 3. And look at, somebody, if you got it, just read 28 through 30 there of John 3. 30.
You yourselves bear witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but that I am sent before him. He that has the bride is the bridegroom, but the friend of the bridegroom that stands and hears him rejoices greatly because of the bridegroom's voice. This my joy, therefore, is made full. He must increase, but I must decrease.
All right, so here's that idea of Jesus as the bridegroom. Of course, you go to Ephesians 5. We'll talk about the church as the bride of Christ. Jesus here is obviously the bridegroom. The children are the friends of the bridegroom. This will be a reference, of course, to Jesus' disciples. But the point of Jesus' question here is that the time had not yet come for his disciples to fast. Well, why not? He was still with them. And so there's no mourning in that sense, because he's with them. In fact, he's going to talk to his apostles in the context of John 14 through 16, really 3 chapters there, where he's talking to them and in many ways kind of bracing them, preparing them for his going away. He's going to die. It's in some sense preparation, getting them ready for that, but even more so when he ascends back into heaven. And he's saying, I'm going to go to my Father. You're going to be sad, but if you fully understood, you would be happy that I'm going to the Father, because I'm going to send the Spirit. And he's pointing out he'll be with them in a very real sense, but not in that physical sense that they had known and come to I guess, expect over that 3 years or so of his ministry. So Jesus is still with them. So he says, why would they fast when the bridegroom is still with them? Why would they mourn? But the time is coming, he says, when that will happen. In the future, he points out his disciples would fast after the bridegroom is taken away. Now, here are a few references I think it's worth looking at. I don't want to get too far off track and because we want to cover a few more questions, but I think it is of interest, and we've talked about it before. It's been some time. I don't know. I was trying to remember. It might have been 2015 or so when we went through the Sermon on the Mount. I'd preached a series of lessons through that, and we talked about fasting in that particular series. And I think, I can't recall. I'd have to go back and look at my notes, but I think it was either a Sunday night, or maybe we took a Sunday morning during that series and did a special study looking at that. It is not something that is commanded of New Testament Christians, but I will say it does, from just passages like this, if nothing else but this one passage, it seems to be expected. And of course, fast can come in different ways. There are different lengths of fast, but it does seem to be expected. A few different references, and I'll get some readers if some other folks want to read these verses. Acts 13, 2 and 3. Billy, you look like you were just itching to read. So I'll get you to read those two verses, and I'll give you another one that's right there in that context. Who else? Robert, 1 Corinthians 7, verse 5. And two more. Brother Mark, Ezra, chapter 8, verse 21. And one more. David, just lost my place. Joel 2, 12 and 15. Joel chapter 2, verses 12 and 15. All right, Billy, you got Acts 13, 2 and 3?
Yes, sir. While they were worshiping the Lord fasting, the Holy Spirit said, "Set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them." And after fasting and praying, they laid their hands on them and sent them off.
All right, so the Spirit says, separate me, Paul and Barnabas. Of course, this is going to be the first missionary journey of Paul. But before they sent them out on that journey, they fasted and they prayed. You see over and over again, we got a couple of Old Testament references, but, again, for time's sake, don't want to get too in-depth on a study of that. And if it's something we need to come back to in another lesson, then that's fine as well. But several times in the Old Testament, you see folks that would fast, and it was used to focus on spiritual things. It's kind of like, instead of eating, I'm going to take that time and devote it to, a lot of times it was prayer, might be a study of the Word or something like that. But you see this in a New Testament context as well. Again, it's not something that is commanded. It's something that is between an individual and the Lord. But I do think it's significant that from Jesus' statement right here in Matthew 9:15, it seems to be expected. Billy, while you're in that context, look at Acts 14:23, please.
And when they had appointed elders for them in every church, with prayer and fasting, they committed them to the Lord in whom they had believed.
All right, so they're getting ready to ordain elders in congregations, and they, in the lead up to that, they prayed, but they also fasted. Again, just a focus on that particular matter. And, if ever there's an occasion for New Testament Christians to fast and pray, it would be when you're getting ready to appoint an elder or elders. And sometimes, in fact, it was, I don't know, it's been fairly recently, within just the last few weeks, I'm on a Facebook group that is the Memphis School of Preaching alumni where I went to preaching school. And one of the graduates made a post, and he says, "Hey, brethren, I'm working with this particular congregation. We would sure appreciate your prayers. We are getting ready, barring anything unforeseen, in the next, I think it was a week or two out, we're going to appoint elders for the first time in this congregation's history." And that was a big deal to them. And I believe now they have since appointed those elders. But yeah, that certainly is an occasion where prayer and fasting would be in order. Robert, did you have the 1 Corinthians 7:5 reference?
Defraud ye not one the other, except it be for consent for a time, that ye may give yourself to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency.
All right, the context there in 1 Corinthians 7 is husbands and wives and the relationship there, and he says don't defraud one another, talking about the physical relationship. But he says, except it be for a time. And he says that you may give yourselves to prayer and fasting. So again, there's a context there where he says, don't defraud one another, don't withhold on that relationship. But there are occasions where there might be a situation for prayer and fasting. It might be one is out of town, traveling, whatever. Brother Mosier taught us 1 Corinthians, and he said, in the context of preachers, he says, you may be away for a gospel meeting, a speaking appointment, a mission trip. But Paul's point there is that's not something that needs to happen on a regular basis. It would be in a situation for prayer and fasting. So again, you see a New Testament reference there. A couple of Old Testament references. No, David, you had Joel too, right? Mark, Ezra 8:21.
Then I proclaimed a fast there at the river of Abba, that we might humble ourselves before our God to seek from him the right way for us and our little ones and all of our possessions.
All right, so they're going to fast to mourn over their sin, and they're going to pray to God seeking direction in their lives, understanding that there were some issues there, and so they want to make correction. So they're getting serious about this. They're going to pray about it, seek God's instruction, and as a part of that, they're going to fast. One reference I don't have that came to my mind is Esther. When I keep wanting to say Haman. Haman was the bad guy. Mordecai, her cousin, I just went blank. Cousin, yeah, that basically raised her. He says, you need to go to the king. We're going to be destroyed. Haman has had this edict signed, and you're our best chance here. You may be the only chance as far as he could tell. Of course, later on, he's going to say, well, we know deliverance is going to rise because God has promised a Messiah, but who knows whether you've come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And, of course, Esther had previously said, look, if I go to the king uninvited and he doesn't extend the scepter, there's but one thing for me, and that's death. And that's when he says, hey, well, who knows? You may be come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Deliverance is going to rise from somewhere. God's going to bring in his Messiah. But maybe he put you here in this position, Esther, just for this purpose. And so she says, okay, you tell the Jews to pray and to fast for a set period of time, and then I'm going to go. And if I perish, she says, I perish. And of course, the king accepted her, and they were delivered through her. And sure enough, looking at the pages of Scripture, God brought her to that kingdom for just that time. Joel 2:12 and 15.
Therefore also known, saith the Lord, turn ye even to me with all your heart, and with fasting, and with weeping, and with mourning. And render your heart and not your garments, and turn unto the Lord your God. For he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and of great kindness repenteth him of evil. Who knoweth he will return and repent, and leave a blessing behind him, even a meat offering and a drink offering unto the Lord your God. Blow over the trumpet in Zion, say a fast, call a solemn assembly.
So he says, you need to turn to the Lord with all your heart, but he also says with fasting. And then, of course, In verse 15, he says, appoint a fast. And it's interesting in that context, he says, rend your heart and not your garments. The Jews were known for that when there was something very disturbing. They were very upset about something. Of course, when Jesus says he's the Son of God, when he's on, if you want to call it a trial, more like a mock trial, when he says, rightly so, that he's the Son of God, oh, the high priest, he's so disturbed, he just rends his garment. What further need have we of witnesses? You've heard the blasphemy. But that was something that the Jews would do when they were very distressed or disturbed or angry. And in Joel's time, you had a lot of tearing of garments. And he says, you need to be pricked in the heart and quit all this outward display and get down to the inward man and get that right with God. And in that context, it involved fasting. So several different references there you see. I used to say, sometimes I would talk about this and I would say, even in the Old Testament prayer, or fasting rather, was not commanded. But I think it is pretty clear when you study from the book of Leviticus on the Day of Atonement, at the very least, they were commanded to fast. It's something that is not immediately apparent perhaps in the King James, because it uses an expression, a phrase. Does anybody know what I'm talking about?
I'm sorry, my wife was talking to me.
What's the phrase used in the Old Testament regarding the Day of Atonement to command them to fast? In the King James, at least, afflict your souls, and that's I guess, would that be an idiom perhaps for fasting? And I think some of the newer versions maybe even actually come out and say that, fasting. But that was a command to fast. So anyway, Jesus talks about why do his disciples not fast, whereas the disciples of John, the disciples of the Pharisees do? Well, because he's the bridegroom. The bridegroom is still with them. When the bridegroom is gone, he says, then there will be fasting. So again, I think it's something that is expected. It's something that is between an individual and God. It's not on me to go around and start taking a survey. Hey, when's the last time you fasted? Have you ever fasted? Well, you need to repent. It's not something that you find a command for, but does seem to be expected. All right, so Matthew 9:28 is our next question. This is in the context of healing two blind men. So let's go ahead and get the context before the question on this one. When Jesus departed thence, two blind men followed him, crying and saying, Thou Son of David, have mercy on us. And when he was come into the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus saith unto them, Believe ye that I am able to do this? I think it was the ESV I wanted to. Yeah, do you believe that I am able to do this? I think the New King James is very similar, if not exact wording there. That's how we would say it today. Do you believe that I'm able to do this? So there's the question. And they answered, Yes, Lord. So they're begging Jesus, have mercy on them. They understand Jesus' power to heal. And of course, at this point, Jesus has been doing some healing, and so no doubt word has spread. And so they ask Jesus to heal them. They call him the Son of David. What's the significance with that? The Messiah was prophesied numerous times to be the Son of David. He's going to sit on the throne of David, his father. This was said in the prophecy when Gabriel came to Mary, spoke to her about her having a child. Though she was a virgin, he's going to have the throne of his father David. He'll sit on the throne of his father David. And all that goes back to 2 Samuel 7, when David wants to build a house for the Lord, a temple, a more permanent dwelling place for God, for God's representative presence. We understand, as Solomon points out in his prayer of dedication after the temple is actually built, you can't contain God within a house, no matter how big it is. He's spirit. But it was to represent God's presence among his people. David wants to do that, The prophet says to him, go ahead. And then God speaks to the prophet and says, hold on, David's not going to build this house. And then God speaks to David and says, you're not going to build my house. Your son is going to build my house. But oh, by the way, I'm going to build you a house. And of course, he's not talking about a physical house, but a household. He's going to establish, and even after the kingdom splits, after Solomon's death, Rehoboam's foolish decision, listening to the wise, not listening to the wise men, listening to the younger foolish man who told him when the people asked for some relief, to tell him, you ain't seen nothing yet, I'm going to make it a lot harder on you. The kingdom splits. Of course, that all goes back to Solomon's sins and his foreign wives who turned his heart away from God. But all throughout that history of the divided kingdom, every king on the throne in Judah was a descendant, a direct descendant of David. And even at times when you would have, you just come this close to having that line extinguished, God preserves it. One occasion, Athaliah, she goes and she tries to destroy all of her grandchildren. It's hard to imagine. You talk about grandparents and the love they have for their grandchildren. She is after all the royal seed. But one escaped, and so he becomes king and continues that line. And even after the captivity, or during the captivity and on, a direct descendant of David continues. And so that's why, one of the reasons why, when you get to Matthew chapter 1, you have this genealogy that we look at, and we sometimes maybe say, well, I'm just going to skip all those names. But that was very important to the Jews. They made a lot of, sometimes even ridiculous accusations. They would try to find ways to criticize Jesus and say he's not who he claimed to be. That is, his enemies did. But one of the things they never attacked was his genealogy because it was incontrovertible. The records were there for them to check if they wanted to, and no doubt they did. Of course, after AD 70, all that was destroyed, but they never, the ones who had direct access to those records, they never criticized that because they knew he was, in fact, the son of David. So numerous times, even in the gospel accounts, he's referred to as, sometimes refers to himself as the son of David. In chapter 21, it's another question we'll get to when we get to that point in the book of Matthew. But he's going to ask, what think ye of Christ? Whose son is he? And their answer was, David's. He's the son of David. And of course, Jesus is going to turn around on that and say, well, why does David call him Lord? He's the son of God. He's the son of David. Of course, he'll also call himself numerous times the son of man, showing his commonality with humanity. The Word became flesh, John 1:14. So, how did they answer the question? Yes, they believe in Jesus' power. You see that there in verse 28. Yea, Lord. Then touched he their eyes, saying, according to your faith, be it unto you. Their eyes were opened, verse 30 says. Jesus straightly charged them, saying, see that no man know it. So, here he says, according to your faith, be it unto you. I feel like we talked about this maybe even last week. Faith was not required for every miracle, right? Not every miracle. Sometimes people will say that today, these people that are supposedly healers, and somebody will say, well, heal me. Somebody that's kind of skeptical, and they'll say, oh, you just don't have faith. Or somebody maybe says, yeah, well, he supposedly healed me, but I'm still sick. He said my cancer was gone, but I've gone to the doctor, and they said I still have cancer. Well, you just didn't have enough faith. Isn't that convenient that you can just put that off on them? But not every miracle in the first century, during Jesus' ministry, during the apostles' ministry, during that time of the miraculous, as the New Testament is being written, not every miracle required faith. We talked, I believe it was last week, about John 9, the blind man. Jesus just comes to him and heals him. Sometimes he would say to somebody like this, do you want to be healed? Do you believe I can do this? And he would do that according to their faith. But sometimes he just healed them. We talked about the lame man at the gate beautiful. He's looking for money. And of course Peter says, silver and gold have I none, such as I have give I unto thee. And he heals him, tells him in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. I think about in Acts chapter 13, there's a guy there who's trying to hinder the gospel. He not only didn't believe, he was actively opposed to the gospel. He's trying to hinder what Paul is doing. And Paul performs a miracle on him. What did he do? He struck him with blindness, right? And that was, even that was a sign to the deputy that he was trying to turn away, as the King James says, from the faith. So not every miracle in the first century required faith. We talked about, in the context of the question we were looking at last week, paralleled in Mark chapter 2, where the friends these four men bring their friend to Jesus. It was their faith that was evidenced. Maybe the sick man believed, maybe he didn't. We're just not told. But anyway, so not every miracle, Bob, you were going to say, not every miracle required faith.
I dated a girl whose father's name was George Darling, an associate of Ira Rice, a well-known person. Anyway, during the heyday of the faith healing, he went to one, and he went up to the body. There was a body in the coffin, and it was like laid out where people could see this guy was going to, I guess, raise him from the dead. And he took a very small, thin pin and put it right through his different coat jacket and suit and all of this until he touched his body. I don't know how he did that all in one little deal, but he did. And lo and behold, the guy jumped, okay, when he hit his skin, okay? And so that party and that show was over. But it's sad. It really was a show. And it really wasn't about magnifying Christ. It's magnifying the person that's doing the faith healing, that people would have faith in that person, which is completely opposite of what New Testament Christianity is all about. And appreciate the courage of that man. We all need to maybe not do stuff like that, but make sure that we do our homework on these people.
Was that Brother Darling or Brother Rice that did that?
Brother Darling.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I was going to say, it sounds like something Brother Rice would have done.
The guy with the withered hand in the synagogue, did he have faith, or was Jesus using him as an example that was talked about forgiving him of sins? And healing the
What
withered
that
hand?
you may know.
I don't think it says anything. It doesn't say one way or the other about his faith. At least not here in Matthew's account, early part of Matthew chapter 9. I don't know that. Oh, never mind. That's the palsied man.
The lesson was that he going to heal that man.
Right.
Because those guys are hypocrites. They would take care of their animals, and he just was upset with them.
The lesson here is, I'm the Son of God, and I can do these miracles because I am God in the flesh. And the apostles even, and you make a good point there, Bob. So many of these so-called healers, modern day folks, even to the present time, they want faith in them. And it was never about that in the New Testament. Even after Jesus ascends back into heaven, mention Acts chapter 3, the man at the gate, beautiful. And boy, the people are just mesmerized, blown away by this miracle that Peter has performed. He says, I don't have any money, but what I have, I'm going to give you. Healing. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk. So the man gets up, and the text there says he was walking, leaping, and praising God. I mean, immediately his feet and ankle bones receive strength, it says, and the people see it. And they rush to Peter. And you can imagine just thronging him. And if ever there was a time for somebody to say, well, hey, what can I say? But he says, why do you stand here looking at us as though by our own power we did this? He says, this was by the power of Jesus. And then he preaches a sermon there in Acts chapter 3 about Jesus. And there's some interesting, if we had more time, some interesting parallels between his sermon on Pentecost and his sermon there in Acts chapter 3 after the healing of that man. But yeah, it was never about faith in them. And I don't think I've ever heard that story about Brother Darling and Brother Rice. I don't know if everybody heard that, but he said that they went to, it was supposed to be I guess not a healing service, but a raising the dead type of thing. And one of them went up to the fella and had a pen, and this guy's lying in a coffin, and he jabbed him with a pen, and the guy moved, which showed, of course, he was not actually dead. I'd heard of, I don't remember who it was. Freddie Clayton is the one that told me about it. I think it was in Dunlap. I believe it was Mormons that were having some kind of big to do. Every night they were saying angels were coming down and they were walking along the water at this lake. And if you'll come, I think they were having like a big tent service or something, and there was a lake behind it. And if you'll come out to the tent meeting, you can see angels walking on the water. And so this went on for a couple of different nights, and whoever these preachers were, they went out. I think there was a visiting preacher in town. Maybe they were having a meeting at the same time at the congregation there. But they went out early in the morning, I mean, just barely daylight, to go check this thing out. Because, oh, man, I mean, the town was just abuzz. The angels were walking on the water last night and all this stuff. And so they go, and they find out that they had rigged up this deal, I mean, just under the surface. Of course, at night, you couldn't see that. But there was like a 2x4 or something where this fellow would walk out there. And so the story was that they went and got a saw. And they sawed it just so it wasn't broken, but it was very much compromised. And so when a grown man that night got out there to this angel that was going to walk on the water, he just plunged into the water, and it shut down the angel walking on water service. But, I'm like you. I don't know if that's the best way to handle those things, but it is kind of humorous, and it certainly drives home the point to people that this is not real. And that's the thing with Jesus. In fact, you're going to get into it. Well, we probably won't. I don't know if we'll get to it today or not, but when you get into chapter 12, they cannot deny the miracle in any way at all. And so they're going to resort to saying things like, okay, well, he's casting out demons, but he's doing it by the power of Satan, which is, Jesus is going to go on to show, utterly illogical, but it's the best they could come up with because they can't deny the miracle. And on one occasion after the raising of Lazarus from the dead, they're going to go or call a kind of an assembly among themselves and say, well, what do we? This man doeth many miracles. If this keeps on, the Romans are going to come and take away our place and nation. And so they can't deny he's doing miracles, but all they're thinking of is in terms of the here and now. It seems when you study this, and R.C. Foster in his great book, Studies in the Life of Christ, he points this out, because sometimes we look at it and we think, and I've thought that, and it's one of the reasons why I remember his book so well, or at least on this point. We see that and we say, well, if they could see him doing the miracles, why would they not be more inclined, as you see in John 6, to try to almost take him by force and say, come on, let's throw off Roman restraint. If he can heal people, if he can raise people from the dead, he can cast out demons, he could destroy the Romans for us. Well, they did. They tried that route in John 6. It didn't work, and it became increasingly evident throughout the ministry of Jesus. He won't use his power to protect himself, at least to an extent. Now, sometimes he did, as in Luke 4, John 8, when they want to take up stones. Well, in Luke 4, they want to throw him off a cliff, essentially. But in John 8, they want to take up stones to stone him, and he passes through their midst. And he's not doing that to protect himself so much as it is to protect his mission. His mission was not to come. He was not going to come and die by stoning or by being thrown off a cliff. He came to die, fulfilling the prophecies, crucified. And so he knew exactly how that was going to go. But they figure out, well, he's not going to use his power to protect himself. And if he's not going to use his power to protect himself, he's certainly not going to protect us when the Romans get all upset and come. And so we got to do something about this. And so they start to plot this plan to kill him. And again, maybe you're like me. I've read that numerous times and kind of go, that kind of doesn't make sense. And especially when they go to arrest him in the garden, because it's the Jews that go to arrest him, the ones who, more than anybody, even his enemies, had seen his miracles. Why were they not afraid that he might turn around and use that power on them? Well, because they'd figured out he was going to do no harm. Well, if he's not going to do any harm, we could even arrest him. And who knows? I think he's not even going to do anything if we kill him. And so they get more, they get not bolder, I guess. I was going to say more and more bold, but they get bolder and bolder, and to the point that they kill him. So all that just to say, again, faith on the part of the one being healed was not always required. Obviously, Lazarus was dead, but he was raised from the dead. Were you going to say something else, Bob?
In 1 Corinthians 2 and verse 4, Paul says the following, which helps us. And my speech and my preaching were not in persuasive words of wisdom, but in the demonstration of the Spirit and of power, that your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. Where can we go today to see that power of God? I mean, that's why those people are going to want to see those miracles. They want to see a real live evidence of the power of God. Where can someone go today to see the power of God?
It's right there in the Word. It's living and powerful, sharper than any two-edged sword, Hebrews 4:12. And so that's where the power is. And that's one of the reasons we don't have miracles today, is we don't need them. The Word has been confirmed. Miracles were not just for any old reason. They were to confirm the message, to confirm the source of the message. And so you have passages like 2 Timothy 4:20, where Paul says, I left Trophimus at Miletus sick. Why didn't he just heal him? He tells Timothy, drink no longer water, but a little wine for thy stomach's sake, not often infirmities. Why didn't he just heal him? Well, because miracles were for a specific purpose. And we don't need miracles to confirm the Word now, because the Word has been confirmed. A more sure word of prophecy, as Peter says in 2 Peter 1. So before we move on from this question here in Matthew 9:28, let's ask the question. We've dealt with this a little bit before. Won't spend too much time on it here. Why does Jesus say, don't say anything? Why does he not want them to, or why does he say, see that no man know it? Of course, when they were departed, verse 31 says, spread abroad his fame in all that country. But why does Jesus say, see that no man know it? And if you want to hold your spot there and go over just a few pages, it's several pages, but go to Mark chapter 1. Oh, man. Time gets away. Mark chapter 1 and 43 through 45, Jesus has healed a leper. And verse 43 says, Jesus straightly charged him, and forthwith sent him away. And then he says, see, thou say nothing to any man, but go thy way, show thyself to the priest, offer for thy cleansing those things which Moses commanded for a testimony unto them. But he went out and began to publish it much, and to blaze abroad the matter, insomuch that Jesus could no more openly enter into the city, but was without in deserted places, in the middle of nowhere, we might say, wilderness. And they came to him from every quarter. And then if you go over to Mark chapter 5, 18 beginning, 18 through 20, when he was come into the ship, Jesus, he that had been possessed with the demon, Jesus had cast out, this was Legion. They said, our name is Legion, for we are many. He'd cast out those demons. The one that had been possessed with the demon prayed that he might be with him, might be with Jesus. Howbeit Jesus suffered him not, but saith unto him, go home to thy friends, and tell them how great things the Lord hath done for thee, and hath had compassion on thee. So here, even right within just a few pages of each other, you have Jesus saying, don't tell anybody, and then saying, go home and tell everybody. Well, why is that? I think both of those contexts give us at least an idea. This one fella, he goes and tells everybody, and Jesus has a hard time going out in public. It's kind of like, sometimes celebrities today, so I can't even go out in public. People are just thronging me, and I can't accomplish anything. And so Jesus, perhaps there's, in some occasions, and of course it could be some combination of these, it could hinder his being able to go out and to teach. It also, sometimes it's a matter of the timeline. Jesus is leaving this area there where, what was the area? I just went blank. Where he healed the man with the legion. Yeah, the Decapolis, the country of the Gadarenes, Gennesaret, Gadarenes. He's leaving that area, and so he tells the fella, instead of coming with me, as the fellow wants to do, he says, you go home and tell everybody how great things God has done for you. Jesus later comes back to that area. And, of course, what happened after he healed that man, by the way? As far as the people. They want him to leave. I've told you before, Brother Brinkley used to say they were more concerned with a cured ham than a cured man. Because it seems that they're upset about losing all those pigs that went off the cliff into the sea. And so they want Jesus to leave. And so, of course, I think there's a lesson in that. If you want him to leave, he'll leave. And so he left, but when he comes back later, there's a whole different reception. And the Bible doesn't come out and tell us, but you can't help but think that man did exactly what Jesus said. And he went home and he told how great things God had done for him. And maybe even he said to some of them, are you kidding me? Yeah, they saw it. And maybe even he's trying to reason with them, and maybe he did. Would seem got through to him. You're more worried about those pigs? Did you see what I was like? And he healed me. And here I am. I'm whole. I'm healthy again. How could you be concerned about those pigs over a human? Whatever it was, when he came back, he got a completely different reception. And the people were very, very interested to hear the gospel preached. So various reasons that we could give why Jesus says that. It's not some kind of a contradiction, but there were reasons. If he says, go and tell it, there's a reason. If he says, keep it quiet for now, there was a reason. So sometimes you just have to look and see. Sometimes there's a clue in the context. Sometimes we're just not told exactly why, but it's not some kind of discrepancy or anything. We've got one question here, Matthew 10. Let's look at that. Matthew 10:29. Try to do this quickly. I know time is quick getting away from us. Matthew 10:29. The question is, are not 2 sparrows sold for a farthing? And one of them shall not fall on the ground without your Father. The context here is he's sending the apostles out to preach in different situations. There it is. Sheep in the midst of wolves, 16. Be wise as serpents, harmless as doves. Beware of men, verse 17. They'll deliver you up to councils, scourge you in their synagogues. 3 different times he tells them not to fear. Verse 26, verse 28, verse 31. And the point of the question is, Jesus' followers, that includes us today, are of more value than many sparrows. And if God takes care of the birds, we saw this in Matthew chapter 6, then what? How much more so is he going to take care of his people? And that's pointing out their need and our need to trust in him as they go out and declare his truth, sometimes doing so even when people may not like it. Preach the word, be instant, in season, out of season. Brother Keeble used to say that means when they like it and when they don't like it. And I like what Brother Eddie Brinkley used to say. That means you preach the word when they want to hug your neck, and you preach the word when they want to break your neck. Preach the truth. And so God expects preachers of truth and teachers of truth to be bold. All right, thank y'all very much. We'll pick up with chapter 11 and several questions that we have in chapter 12. Lord willing, next week we'll have a short break before our worship. Thank y'all for